Hello and welcome to this introduction to A-level history. I'm Mr. Batchelor and I will be going over our offer here at Workington Academy for our A-level history, talking through our different subjects that we offer and talking through maybe some activities that we have for you to do as well today. Hoping that you get a better understanding of what we do for A-level history, but also giving you a bit of background knowledge to make your choice about whether this is the right course for you or not. The A-level history that we offer is AQA, A-level history, and we offer two topics: the Tudors, England 1485 to 1603, and France in Revolution 1774 to 1815. Both are absolutely fascinating courses and offer an opportunity to really study some fascinating times in both English, British, and world history. And it will give you that depth of understanding, wider knowledge as well. So let's start off with the Tudors. The first topic that you'll have here is a breadth study, which means it's done over a long period of time, a relatively long period of time. And you'll examine Tudor England between 1485 and 1603. You'll look at the change, continuity, causes, and consequences of a whole range of factors. Things such as looking at how effectively did the Tudors restore and develop the powers of the monarchy, how well and effectively England was governed in the period. Look at relations with foreign powers, and how did the Tudors manage to hold on to their power through and enable succession. We'll look at English society and the economy, and we'll look at the effect that intellectual and religious ideas had on society and what developments these factors had, and how they transformed England and how they influenced Tudor England in this period. Then you'll also look at key individual and groups and see how they affected these developments over this period as well. Part one of the course, which is your year 12, you'll look at two Tudor monarchs, the founding father, as it were, of the Tudor monarchy, Henry VII, looking at his reign from 1485 to 1509. And you'll look at his ability to consolidate power, the way he ran the country. You'll look at foreign policy. You'll look at the society of England at the time, his economic developments and the economic developments of England at the time, and the impact that certain religions, arts, and learning had on society at the time. You'll then look at Henry VII's son, his very famous son, Henry VIII, although not necessarily the one who was meant to take over from Henry VII. Henry VIII ruled from 1509 to 1547. He's probably one of the most famous Tudor monarchs, maybe because of the number of wives he had, the changes he made to the religion in England at the time, and also to the way maybe he got rid of some of his wives. So you'll look at Henry VIII, his character and aims. You'll look at the way he ran England. You look at his relations with other countries. You'll look at society at this time and the economic developments, as well as religion. Again, huge factor in this time. The second part of the course, year 13, you'll look at the instability as the mid-Tudor crisis from 1547 to 1563, where technically we had three monarchs, one of whom only lasted 9 days, and the other two lasting not a considerable sum of time, looking at Edward VI and Mary I. You'll then move on to look at the triumph of Elizabeth from 1563 to 1603, and looking at the events, again, looking at government, religion, key individuals, and foreign policy again. To help get you a bit of understanding, see if you know much, what I'd like us to do is a little activity with your teacher in a few seconds. I'm going to get them to pause the video, and I'm going to get you to ask everyone in the class, maybe talk to the person you're sat with, talk to the person near you, and then feed back to your teacher. We'll do maybe 6-7 minutes on this. What do you know about the Wars of the Roses? Maybe take a clue from what you can see on the pictures there. Even come up with any idea at all. You might know loads, you might know nothing. So if you could pause the video now and we'll get on with that activity. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully some people have got a bit of an idea. If not, here's a bit more information. We've got two roses here. We've got the Lancaster Rose and the York Rose. Now, the War of the Roses essentially was a series of battles fought in medieval England from 1455 to 1485 between two houses, Lancaster and the House of York. The name comes from the fact that the two sides, Lancaster and York, they're symbols with the Lancaster Rose and the York Rose. The reasons for this are many. But here are some of the reasons for the Wars of the Roses. Well, both sides, Lancaster and York, were both descendants of King Edward III. The ruling king, Lancastrian King Henry VI, he was surrounded himself with unpopular nobles and eventually had mental health issues, which then sort of opened the doors to other people to kind of fill vacuums of powers. There was civil unrest of much of the population in the time. And of course, there were many powerful lords who had their own private armies, which again is going to add to instability in this period as people try to vie for power in huge power vacuums that existed. You can have a little go at this activity, a little blockbuster quiz. Here are the key names that are in the blockbuster quiz. I'm not expecting you to know all of them. Some of you who've done history may have come across these as you've done your study of Elizabeth, or some of you may not have studied history. So here are the names, and some of you may just have an interest in it, and hopefully you do have a keen interest in history if you're thinking about it as an A-level option. So if you want to pause the video now and take a look at these names. Okay, we'll move on. Here's the quiz. You should have a quiz sheet in front of you. Get your teacher to stop the video. You've got a sheet in front of you. You've got 10 minutes. Try and figure out who all these initials are based on the sort of key questions there. So it takes about 10 minutes. Feedback, see if we can get the answers, and I'll run through the answers with you in a couple of minutes. So take 10-minute break now. Answer the questions. Let's go. Okay, here are the answers. So if you like to pause here and you can go through your answers and see where you're at. So if you take 6-7 minutes, pause it, check your answers. Okay, so the other part of the course is France and Revolution. Now, this is a depth study, so you look into a shorter period in more depth. And this is an absolutely fascinating period. I am a little bit biased because this is the one that I teach. But we'll run through it. Part one, like with the Tudors, part one, you look at the origins of the French Revolution, looking at where this revolution came from. Then you'll move on to looking at the attempts to kind of have a halfway house with a constitutional monarchy. And then eventually the period known as the Terror, which is sort of symbolized by the use of the guillotine, which you can see in the picture here, was although meant to be a way to kind of make it equal for all people to die who were going to die. Everyone died in the same way. It was still seen as a brutal torture instrument to a certain extent, used to keep people in line. Part two, we'll move on to looking at this key individual here, Napoleon. We'll look at how he came to power between 1795 and 1799. And then we'll look at what his rule was like. But we'll look at his rule in two ways. We'll look at it in terms of what it was like in France, and then we'll see what it was like in terms of relations with other parts of Europe and how his influence ebbed out into the rest of Europe. Again, what we'll do is we need to get a bit of context. Hopefully some people know a little bit, but what we'll do is get your teacher to pause the video for about 6 minutes or so. If you could talk with the person you're sat next to, share some ideas about what you think you might know about the French Revolution. Just try and have a guess, maybe from what we've talked about already, and just share some ideas. Look at the pictures, to look at what we've talked about, share them. So if I get you to pause, share your ideas, feedback to your teacher, that'd be great. So we'll start now, 6 minutes, go. Okay, so let me run through it then for you, for those of you who maybe do know a little bit, or for those of you who don't. Essentially, the period of French history that you'll be studying from 1774 to 1815 was hugely significant for France, but actually really significant for the world. Much of what happened in this period resonates through to this day, and particularly on ideas of power, legitimacy, and the state. Much of what you're going to study will center initially around the Bourbon monarchy, the ruling dynasty of France, housed just outside of Paris at the Palace of Versailles, which some of you may be familiar with for another reason. And with a particular focus, we're going to look at the rule of, or the supposed absolute rule of Louis XVI, and look at his wife, Marie Antoinette, and ultimately look at their executions. As part of the course, we're going to examine the decline of the monarchy, the decline of the French social structure that had existed for hundreds of thousands of years, for over nearly 1,000 years before, which was known as the Ancien Regime. And we'll look at the creation of the French Republic, a period of time without a monarchy. The reason we will look at a whole range of reasons for the decline, and these include things like the estate system, which was basically how France was organized, which was made up of different social groups. We had the first estate, which was made up of the church, the second estate, the nobility, and the third estate, which was effectively everyone else. And this third estate was burdened with tax in France. The church and the nobility, they didn't have to pay tax, whereas everyone else did, despite the fact they were probably the ones with most of the money. We'll also look at issues of the French economy that were going on, long-term issues, but one in particular that really knocked France, which was the vast sums of money that they spent on getting back at the British by supporting America in their war of independence against Britain. Then we'll also look at the impact of an intellectual development that was often housed in people's front rooms, and they called them salons. And this period was known as the Enlightenment. And the aim of this period was to challenge traditional ideas, and traditional ideas was often known as dogma. And these ideas included things like monarchy and religion, and all this was to be challenged and discussed. Eventually, we're going to move on to that hugely significant individual and significant period of time, which was dominated by Napoleon. Napoleon was originally a member of a minor Corsican nobility, and he would eventually rise through the ranks of French military due to key events of the French Revolution, which eventually led to his surprisingly successful, many put him there to fail almost, or at least not achieve much, against Austria and Austria's allies through his conquest of Italy. And eventually, ultimately, as you can see at that bottom picture there, crowning himself Emperor of France while the Pope watched on. Again, here's another blockbuster quiz. Some of what I've talked about, hopefully you've remembered some of that. It all comes up in here. So if we can get you to pause what you're doing now, have a go at this sheet, take another 10 minutes or so, work on your own, go through these, and try and do your best, okay? So 10 minutes, go. Okay, here are the answers. If you want to pause now, you can go through the answers, check how you've done on the blockbuster quiz. Hopefully, you've got a few of them and you've got a slightly better understanding of some of the key individuals and ideas of the French Revolution course. So pause now, check your answers. Okay, so that effectively is our introduction to A-level history. By no means is it everything we study. It's a nice sort of glaze over what we do. But hopefully an opportunity for you to see what we study and the content that you'll be looking at if you do choose A-level history here at Workington Academy. If you do have any questions, please feel free to come see myself, Mr. Batchelor, or come and see Mr. Wilson or Miss Campbell or anyone in the history department, and we'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you about anything that you're interested in terms of this course. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this, and hopefully we'll see lots of you in the near future. Thanks very much.